Welcome to this explainer. All right, so if you are a parent of a kid anywhere between 3 and 10 years old, you probably know the absolute struggle of childhood nighttime fears. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating phenomenon, the incredible way a child's developing imagination conjures up their absolute worst nighttime terrors. But more importantly, we're going to learn how that exact same imagination is actually the secret weapon you can use to cure those fears. Okay, let's just jump right into it.
So, set the scene. It's 2 a.m., you're absolutely exhausted, your preschooler is terrified, and you are desperately trying to use rock-solid adult logic to banish a monster that supposedly lives under the bed. You say, "Honey, monsters aren't real," or you flip on the closet light to prove it's totally empty. But it doesn't work, does it? The panic is still there. Well, today we're unpacking the cognitive science behind exactly why your totally rational logic completely fails in the middle of the night. Here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. We are going to cover 1. The double-edged imagination. 2. The science of childhood fear. 3. The verbal threat pathway. 4. Children as naive skeptics. 5. Flipping the script. And 6. Practical imagination tools.
Okay, section 1, the double-edged imagination and the problem with logic. Let's start with a pretty massive paradigm shift. Imagination is a double-edged sword. It is the ultimate driver of a child's fear, literally creating terrifying shadows out of thin air. But, incredibly, it's also going to be our hero. Moving right into section 2, the science of childhood fear and why imagination runs wild. To really get this, we need to look at the developmental timeline and cognitive science of why preschoolers are so incredibly prone to these nighttime anxieties in the first place. Get a load of this statistic. According to researchers, a massive 74% of 4 to 6-year-olds report being afraid of imaginary creatures. 74%. So if your child is utterly terrified of something you literally can't see, just know that you are not alone. They're in the vast majority. But check out this developmental contrast. While 74% of 4 to 6-year-olds have this fear, that number completely plummets to just 5% for 10 to 12-year-olds. Honestly, that should be a huge sigh of relief for parents. It proves this fear is just a normal developmental milestone tied to cognitive maturation, not some deep psychological issue. They are going to outgrow it, but understanding why it peaks right now helps us manage it today. So why the peak? It all comes down to something called magical thinking. Between the ages of 3 and 5, a kid's brain goes through an absolute explosion of imagination, and the boundary between fantasy and reality gets incredibly thin. We call this the imagination reality leak. When a child imagines a monster in the corner, their amygdala, the brain's internal alarm system, reacts with a very real adrenaline spike and cortisol release. Their body reacts exactly as if a monster were physically standing right there. The fear is physiological. It is extremely real to them, even if the monster isn't. Section 3, the verbal threat pathway and how stories create reality. Let's look at how kids can acquire these incredibly intense fears without ever actually experiencing anything bad directly. Just hearing a spooky story from a friend on the playground, or catching a 2-second clip of something scary on a screen, that is literally all it takes. Because of that hyperactive imagination we just talked about, a child's brain takes a simple verbal warning and just runs with it. They paint a vivid, horrifying picture in their mind's eye. Their imagination takes the mere suggestion of a threat and converts it into very real, physically experienced terror. All right, section 4, children as naive skeptics, tackling the myth of the gullible child. Now, this is where things get really fascinating because it challenges the whole idea that kids just blindly believe whatever they hear or imagine. Researchers actually call kids naive skeptics. They don't just buy into everything. They default to being skeptical about fantastical claims, and they really do try to evaluate the evidence around them. But here's the catch. Their reality monitoring skills are still under construction. So imagine them alone in a dark room. Shadows are distorting familiar toys. The visual evidence is super ambiguous. Their confusion in that moment is actually a totally rational response to bad data. And to make matters worse, something called dream reality confusion is peaking right around this age. As this research points out, vivid dreams about monsters act as a form of uncontrolled imaginal exposure. To a child's developing brain, a terrifying nightmare isn't just a dream, it's evidence. It basically proves to their brain that the threat is legit and has to be dealt with. And that right there is exactly why dismissing their fear with adult logic completely misses the mark. Which brings us to section 5, flipping the script and using imagination as the cure. The big takeaway here is this. If logic is a bust, what do? We have to pivot. If imagination built the monster, we can use that very same superpower to tear it down.
Think about these two pathways side by side. On one hand, you have the verbal threat pathway, where imagination generates real physiological panic. But look at the flip side. We can totally hijack that exact same cognitive mechanism using therapeutic imagery. By guiding a child to vividly imagine a safe space or a happy outcome, their body responds with emotional regulation. You are literally taking the source of their terror and using it to generate profound feelings of safety. How cool is that? And there is heavy clinical evidence backing this up. Dr. Charlotte Resnick's work on the power of a child's imagination demonstrates just how incredibly effective visualization techniques really are. Kids are naturally wired to use their imagination. By giving them targeted imagery tools, we can help them transform stress, fix sleep issues, and totally conquer those giant fears.
One of the absolute best ways to do this is a technique called imagery rescripting. Basically, you have your child recall the disturbing image, say the monster in the closet, and then consciously change the ending of the story in their mind to something empowering. It's all about narrative control. You aren't trying to convince them the monster isn't there. You are helping them rewrite the scene so that they are the confident hero who handles the situation. Okay, Section 6, Practical Imagination Tools. Let's step out of the theory and look at some rapid-fire, completely concrete strategies you can use tonight at bedtime.
First up is a fantastic, zero-prep mental exercise called the Brave button. Ask your child to close their eyes and picture a bright, glowing button right on their chest. Maybe even ask them what color it is. Tell them this is their Brave button, and pressing it turns on an invisible, warm force field. Have them actually press their chest, take a big, deep breath, and as they exhale, imagine that safe, glowing force field expanding to cover their entire bed. It creates this powerful physical anchor for calmness right inside their own body.
Next is a fun one, the tofu technique. Look, anxiety is physical, tight muscles, racing heart. To calm the mind, we've got to calm the body first. This is a super kid-friendly version of progressive muscle relaxation. Have them tense their muscles up as hard and stiff as uncooked pasta, and then release them to be as soft and squishy as tofu. And using silly words like tofu is super intentional. Humor is naturally incompatible with fear. If you can get a little giggle out of them, you literally interrupt the fear response loop in their brain. Finally, try some monster makeover strategies. Have your kid draw the monster, but then use their imagination to make it totally ridiculous. Slap a clown nose on it, or give it roller skates. Or have them write the creature a little letter offering friendship. Also, if you use a spray bottle at night, upgrade it. Change it from monster spray, which honestly kind of validates that monsters are real, to sweet dream mist. This shifts the focus entirely toward creating happy dreams. These tools reframe that terrifying threat into something they can completely control. Wow, we have covered a lot of ground in this explainer today, from the brain science of naive skeptics to super practical tools like the Brave button. Dealing with nighttime fears is exhausting for sure, but it is also a huge opportunity. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Since imagination built the monster, how will you help your child use their own creative power to dismantle it tonight? Because when you do that, you aren't just getting them to sleep, you are giving them emotional resilience that they'll carry for a lifetime. Thanks so much for joining me.